Hello everybody, neither welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. So here we are once again at the end of another week. It is weekly roundup time, and I want to go ahead and say, like I did in the last episode, I apologize for being gone for longer than somewhat usual, but I was trying to get us back on our regular schedule here, so hopefully from here on out I will be back on our regular schedule unless I am out of town or go on vacation or something, and I usually let you guys know that. But anyway, just wanted to go ahead and apologize before we get into our very full slate of things to talk about. Just apologize for being gone a little longer than usual and say that I missed you guys, and I am happy to be back here and happy to be recording again. So let's go ahead and start with the story that everybody has been talking about ever since it happened, and that is Robert Mueller's testimony before Congress, which happened on Tuesday. Yeah, it was Tuesday. And, I mean, I thought, actually, no, I take it back, it was Wednesday. My bad. I thought about doing an episode on it on Thursday, and I decided not to, obviously. And that's because, I mean, here's my thoughts on it. Because everybody else has already digested all this information, given their thoughts. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows at this point what was and was not said during the testimony. Here's where I'm at with it. That was boring. That was a big ass boring nothing burger, and it was kind of a waste of everybody's time. And let me go ahead and back this up and make a point that I knew that it was going to be this because Mueller has made it abundantly clear before his testimony. The last statement that he made publicly before announcing that he would be testifying in front of Congress about any of this was that the report was his final word on the whole situation with Russiagate and collusion and obstruction, and basically what was in the report is what he thinks, what he knows. He did not plan on elaborating anything beyond what is in the report. Basically, his stance was read the damn report. So I was kind of surprised that he even agreed to testify before Congress in the first place, and there might have been some legal reasons behind that. I forget if I ever discussed it on here, but there is a little bit of legal difference because once Robert Mueller said publicly that he is no longer special counsel, he is a private citizen again. Your legal status is a little different as to whether or not you can decline to testify before Congress on certain things. If he was still special counsel, he could decline based on the fact that he was still operating in that function, but now as a private citizen, you don't really have as much leeway. Well, technically, you're not supposed to. You do now. It's a very weird situation. Anyway, so he goes and testifies before Congress, and it was what I expected it to be, which is basically Mueller deflecting and telling people essentially to read the damn report. And what's in the report is what I think and what I know, and he didn't elaborate anything beyond what was in the report, which is exactly what he said he was going to do. So the whole thing was just kind of dumb to me. The only really electrifying moment that kind of came of it was during the first half of the congressional testimony. Ted Lieu asked him whether or not he thought that if Trump was not the president, if he was just a private citizen, if he could be indicted for obstruction. And Mueller said at that point, yes, I do think he could be indicted on obstruction. But in the second half of the testimony, I believe it was Matt Gertz that asked him to clarify his statement on that, and he kind of walked it back a bit. So where that is ambiguous, but whatever, it kind of doesn't matter, because the whole point of this was to get Mueller in front of Congress to try to extract some new information that wasn't in the report that would tip the scales one way or another towards impeachment or not impeachment. That was the point of this. And like I said, Mueller already made his views very clear on the topic, and he pretty much stuck to that. So when I say this was a nothing burger, I am a very results-oriented kind of person. So if the goal was to discover new information, that was a failure. Like, there was nothing new here to be found. So it was kind of a ginormous waste of time by my standards. Now, a lot of people pointed out that during Mueller's testimony, it seemed like he wasn't super familiar with the report. He did ask a lot of times to have, like, if somebody was asking him something specific about the report, then point out chapter and verse, basically, so that he can look and see if what was being said was what was said in the report. Okay. Cool. Whatever. A lot of people have looked at that as either Mueller not being super familiar with the report, or kind of extrapolating that he didn't write the report. And to me, it doesn't matter so much who wrote the report. I mean, I'm sure he did not sit down and write down every word by himself. That would be like expecting everybody who sponsors legislation in Congress to have sat down and wrote down every word by themselves. It's usually by committee. I'm sure this probably was too. To me, it's immaterial. The report is what it is. It says what it says. I don't really care who wrote it. It just, it is. It exists. That's it. This is the report. Trying to divine who wrote it and who didn't, I don't really see where that gets anybody anywhere towards the end goal of deciding if there is enough there for impeachment, which is the whole point. That was the whole point of this whole exercise in having special counsel and doing this investigation, is to try to figure out if there's an impeachable offense. So, one thing I do want to say on that topic of how he presented himself during the congressional testimony. Robert Mueller is not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. He knew what he was walking into. He knew that he was walking into a situation that on both sides, be it the Republican side or the Democrat side, this was set up to be something of a gotcha moment for him, so that other people could use his words to make their points. If I were in his shoes, I too would be incredibly careful with my words, and I would parse my words very carefully, knowing that my words, whatever I said in that testimony, was going to be used by other people to try to bolster their point, whether it's pro-impeachment, anti-impeachment. I don't criticize him for that, and I don't criticize him for making people point out, if you're going to say that XYZ was said in the report, point out exactly where it was said, so that I could read it and be like, okay, this is what was said. I mean, I wouldn't expect him to have the report memorized chapter and verse like that. And like I said, I viewed it as him understanding what this congressional testimony, grandstanding, circus, shit show was, and not wanting to participate as much as he could possibly do without being slapped with some kind of contempt charge or anything like that. That's how I viewed it. A lot of people viewed it differently. That's cool. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. Like, nothing is going to come of this. Like, there was nothing in this congressional testimony that moved anybody's needle. Everybody saw what they wanted to see. Everybody heard what they wanted to hear. And it was another one of those where, like, if you're watching it live and then you're also looking at, like, reactions on Twitter, it was one of those where you're wondering, like, am I watching the same thing that these people are watching? Because it seems like they're watching a completely different testimony than what I'm watching. And that has just been the way of this whole Mueller report situation, is that, I mean, everybody has read into it what they wanted to read into it. Nobody's opinion changed. This changed nobody's opinion. Nobody learned anything. Nothing new was discovered. The whole damn thing was a waste of time, like damn near every other congressional testimony that we are subjected to nowadays. It was a bunch of grandstanding nonsense, and people wanted to either yell at Mueller or try to get information out of him. Like, the whole thing was just stupid. It was stupid, it was pointless, it was a waste of time. Mueller said off the rip that it was going to be stupid and pointless and a waste of time. So, there we are. We just wasted a bunch of time on stupid bullshit that could have been spent discussing more important, better things. So, anyway, that is my thoughts on the Mueller testimony. Moving on. Let's talk about a couple of stories that did not get as much press as they should have, because the Mueller testimony was sucking all the air out of the room, and also because for some godforsaken reason, the press doesn't talk about this as much as they should, although that is changing, I will say that, due to certain cases that have become widespread, kind of viral, I don't want to say phenomenon, because that just makes it sound like a lot more positive than what it really is, but a couple of stories that are really starting to gain traction, especially on social media, that's calling attention to certain things that I've been trying to explain to you guys for a while. But anyway, over the past week, what has happened is basically ICE has gotten new powers as far as expedited removal procedures are concerned. Now, I want to back up and explain how this used to work so that you can understand how this will be working going forward, or at least until somebody brings a legal challenge against it, which that's a whole nother ball of wax. Anyway, so how this used to work is that CPB, Customs Border Patrol, and ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, could, within 100 miles of the U.S. border, in any direction, north, south, east, west, could detain people and put them in expedited removal, provided the people were within that 100-mile radius and had been here 2 weeks or less. So, now, the 100-mile thing was a stretch to begin with. When these rules were put into place that you can do this close to the border, it wasn't really intended to be like 100 miles from the border. It was intended to be a hell of a lot closer. But that is how it has been interpreted lately. And obviously, within 100 miles of a border of the United States encompasses a lot of fucking land, including a lot of land where a lot of people live in. Like, think about, unless you live, like, really in the interior of the country. I mean, I live outside of that zone. I'm in Atlanta, but most people do kind of live within that 100-mile radius of a U.S. border. And like I said, it's any U.S. border, be it land, be it ocean, be it whatever. So, bear that in mind, because that is not how this is going to be going forward. ICE now has the authority to, at any point in the United States of America, like beyond the 100-mile radius, to detain anybody who they think is undocumented and to put them in expedited removal. What expedited removal is a system where basically you get fast-tracked to deportation. And let me back up and try to explain something else here too. It's not only that ICE can do it anywhere in the United States now, they can now do it to anybody who has been here for less than 2 years. That's a massive jump from 2 weeks. Like, it's the 100 miles 2 weeks thing is suspect enough. To give ICE the ability to choose at random, I mean, because they're like ICE, just like any other law enforcement organization, there is no level of accountability here. So basically, ICE can pull over or grab anybody who they think is here undocumented up until, like, unless you can prove that you've been here for 2 years. And when I say prove it, I mean prove it on the spot. Because expedited removal, you're talking like days. You're not getting your day in court. You're not getting due process. So in other words, unless you can prove to an ICE official that you can prove to somebody who picks you up on the actual spot that you have been in this country more than 2 years, you are put into expedited removal. Oh my God. Where to start with this? First off, this is making ICE judge, jury, and executioner. Because like I said, if you do not get your day in court, you do not get that due process, you never get to argue your case in front of a judge that you've been here more than 2 years, or that you're a U.S. citizen, or that you are currently in the process of whatever, whether you're asylum, whether you're applying for green card, whether you're applying for full citizenship. You don't get a chance to go make your case in front of a judge before you get put into deportation proceedings. That is flagrant due process violations. No matter how you feel about these people, imagine if you got picked up and you got put into the system and you never got a chance to be like, hey, guys, no, I don't belong here. And next thing you know, you're God knows fucking where in Mexico, and you're just like, but wait, what? What? No. What the hell just happened? But that's the system that is being set up right now. So, obviously, huge due process violations. And then you have the very unsavory idea that now people need to walk around with papers to prove that you have been here for at least 2 years, or to straight up prove that you're a U.S. citizen, and that ICE can demand them, like, on the spot, like, show me your papers. That leads to a definite argument that is legalizing unreasonable search and seizure. Like, that is not a reasonable thing to ask somebody to be able to prove on the spot what their legal status is or how long they've been living in this country. Like, that's unreasonable. Like, there's no way around that. So, it's just this, it's horrible. It's fucking horrible. And what's going to end up happening is, because you're entrusting ICE to do all of this, it's going to be extrajudicial. It's never going to make it into a court. You'll be very, very, very lucky if you make it to court before you get put God knows where. Now you're making them judge, jury, and executioner. And what's going to happen is what has been starting to be publicized, has been happening, is U.S. citizens are going to get caught up in this. I mean, just on the sheer numbers of people that are wandering around in the country who may or may not be here legally, who may be U.S. citizens, who may be somewhere in the process of legal immigration, these people are going to get picked up. And it's already something that has been happening for a while, and there's a couple of cases that have gone viral. The most notable one being the Francisco Irwin Galicia case, and that is the one of the 18-year-old who got picked up. He was with a group of fellow students. They were traveling to a soccer camp, and they got caught up in a CPB checkpoint. Sorry, forgot the word for a second. And he did have on him, he had his Texas ID. This was in Texas, so he had his Texas ID. He didn't have a driver's license because he's only 18. So he had his ID, he had a social security card, and he had one of those little, like, I don't know if you guys know these, but I have one. It's like a little tiny, like, laminated version of your birth certificate. Like, it's not official, but it's like, it's somewhat used for identification. So he had all this on him, and still CPB took him into custody, also took his 17-year-old brother into custody. 17-year-old brother ended up self-deporting because he was not a U.S. citizen, but he ended up self-deporting to his grandma's house down in Mexico to get access to a phone so that he can call their mom and let them know what is going on, like where your children are at, which I can only imagine how this woman must have felt. Like, all of a sudden your children are fucking missing. Like, and you can't find them. They can't call you. Like, I can't even begin to imagine. So this kid, the 18-year-old, is in CPB custody for a couple of weeks. Then he gets transferred to ICE custody for a couple of weeks. So he's in custody for about a month, like a little over a month. And his mother presents his birth certificate and everything to CPB. She also presents it to ICE. And there's just nothing happening. Like, they're just keeping this kid. He's a U.S. citizen, which should not be that freaking hard to verify whether somebody's a U.S. citizen or not. Like, all this shit is in databases. It takes, what, half an hour to run this information to find out if someone's a U.S. citizen or not? But no, this kid is just hanging out in various custodies for a month, and magically, within 48 hours of this story going public and going viral, all of a sudden, ICE was able to figure out that he's a U.S. citizen and we should release him from custody. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Really? Really? And here's the problem. There is not really any will in CPB or ICE once somebody's in detention to find out what their legal status actually is. Like, this 18-year-old kid almost self-deported to get out of ICE custody. Like, that's how bad it is. And for what it's worth, he validated that the situations in CPB custody and in ICE custody are as bad as everybody says they are. That, like, it's just horrible. Like, people are sleeping on concrete with Mylar blankets, and you've got guys sleeping next to toilets, and you've got insane overcrowding, and it's just this horrible situation. And everybody's focusing on the fact that a U.S. citizen got caught up in this. And I'm like, that's important too. Like, don't get me wrong. That's important. But that anybody is being made to live this way is shitty. And this is going to continue to happen. And it's going to happen to more U.S. citizens because ICE is being given these powers to just round up people however the fuck they want. And it's the same way, ICE is the same way as any other law enforcement. Like, they can pull you over for what the hell ever. And the saving grace of this, and I say saving grace very, very loosely, is that ICE cannot let themselves into your home, your car, anywhere that you do not want them to be unless you invite them in. The way they get around this, though, is they'll call local PD. And local PD will come snatch your ass out and hand you over to ICE. So yeah, this is a really nasty, ugly situation that is going to get, it's going to be so bad. Like, it's already starting to look horrible. And like I said, you're already starting to get these cases where U.S. citizens are getting caught up. And I saw another one the other day where local PD called in ICE to pick up a guy who, get this, not only was a U.S. citizen, but at the time that ICE picked him up, he had his real ID driver's license, his passport, his military ID, and his dog tags. how much more documentation could you possibly fucking expect from somebody than that? But they still picked him up, and they still put him in detention, which proves the point that ICE doesn't really give a shit what you present to them. If they want to pick you up, they're going to pick you up. Same way that I saw another case today. A 9-year-old and a 14-year-old got picked up walking through a checkpoint. 9-year-old had a passport on her. U.S. citizen. CPB decided that, oh, that doesn't look like you in that picture, so this must be fake. And they held her for 48 hours. A 9-year-old. And tried to coerce her into making a false statement that she was somebody else. And actually got her 14-year-old brother, who they also took into detention, to sign a false statement saying she was somebody else, on threat of him being arrested for human trafficking and sex trafficking. Like, this is what we're dealing with right now, people. Like, it's just, it's nuts, and it's going to get worse. And that's why I keep emphasizing this. Like, understand what it is that is being given to these law enforcement agencies as far as leeway to just snatch up people off the damn street who aren't doing anything to even begin to warrant this kind of treatment. And it's just, it's horrible. It's awful and it's horrible. And it's just, people should start paying attention to this. And like I said, because of these cases with these U.S. citizens, people are starting to pay attention to this and starting to realize that, oh shit, no, this is bad. Like, nobody should have this kind of power. And it's like, yes, nobody should have this kind of power. That's it. Yes. And they shouldn't be able to do it to anybody, U.S. citizen or not. Like this, yes, let's start talking about this. But moving on from that, because there is plenty of other immigration-related nonsense to talk about. Moving on to the asylum ban that very thankfully isn't at this point. We've taken to calling it asylum ban 2.0 in relation to asylum ban 1.0 that already got struck down. And like I said, I'm going to go ahead and explain exactly what it is the Trump administration was trying to do so that you understand why this is so upsetting in the first place. Even though the Ninth Circuit did strike this down, this is not in effect, thank God. But what the Trump administration tried to do was to essentially ban asylum again. So what they were trying to do is make it to where, say, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. Like, if you traveled through another country, in this case, Mexico, that you would have to apply in Mexico for asylum, despite the fact that there is no safe third country agreement between the U.S. and Mexico. The thing that especially sucked about this, aside from the fact that, first off, you're circumventing both U.S. and international law by trying to make people do that. Like, unless there is a safe third country agreement between two countries, you cannot force somebody to apply for asylum in another country just because they passed through it if they want to come to yours. And like I've said before, Mexico has pretty much point blank said, we're not doing that. The thing that really got me about this, though, is that this would have applied to anybody. And originally it was reported that it would only apply to people coming to the border from a certain point going forward. No, it would have applied to everybody waiting, including those who are in the Remain in Mexico program, those who are waiting in line, there's the line, they're waiting in it, waiting for their turn, and who have been doing what has been asked of them, they're waiting at ports of entry. It would have applied to anybody still there, which would have been insanely, grossly unfair to these people who did what was asked of them. So it would have been punishing people who are trying to seek asylum by the new rules that have been put forth that you need to come through a port of entry, otherwise you're going to be declined, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it would have affected them too. which obviously, if you make a situation where you set forth a set of rules and people obey them, and then all of a sudden you change the rules in the middle of the game and then apply them retroactively, eventually people are going to stop playing by the rules. People are going to stop trying to go through ports of entry where there is metering, and that is another thing that's just wildly, grossly illegal. But it is happening, and nobody wants to talk about that. But yes, it would have affected them too, ultimately. But, like I said, thankfully, the Ninth Circuit did block that asylum ban from going through. So, as it stands right now, as far as that particular situation is concerned, everything is the way it was. And not to say that that's all super great, like metering is still happening. You still have this situation where a lot of people are being pushed back into staying in Mexico and very dangerous places in Mexico. So that's not great either, but at least those people who did show up and who did get in line aren't going to get fucked over. At least right now. It's all subject to change. You guys know how this works with immigration. And segueing from that into the last sort of bit of immigration news to attempt to discuss, because I honestly, I'm very confused and I don't know what the fuck is going on with this. And that is the idea that we maybe signed a safe third country agreement with Guatemala. And I talked about this on the last weekly roundup about how this did not happen. And basically what ended up happening on the Guatemalan side is that there were injunctions filed against allowing the Guatemalan president to do this unilaterally. Basically, their Supreme Court said that if you're going to sign a safe third country agreement with the U.S., it has to have their congressional approval, which it does not. So, I am very baffled as to what exactly was signed yesterday. And for what it's worth, it has been over 24 hours at this point that this agreement has been signed, and the White House has not released any kind of documentation detailing what the hell the agreement is. And the word coming out from the Trump White House versus what's coming out of Guatemala is substantially different enough for those of us who follow this to be like, what the fuck? Because as it stands, the Guatemalan Supreme Court was very clear that the Guatemalan President Morales could not just unilaterally make this decision. And for what it's worth, Guatemala is about to have presidential elections in, I believe it's 3 weeks. So that adds a whole nother wrinkle to this, that by the time that this is allegedly supposed to go into effect, and I say allegedly because Guatemala has released documentation about what the agreement is. I don't read Spanish, so I can't really speak to it. I can only go off of what I've seen other people's interpretations of it is, and that is that this is not supposed to go into effect till August. So I don't even know if Morales will be president in August. I don't know where this stands legally in Guatemala. There are already people protesting it in Guatemala. There's already been legal challenges put forth in Guatemala on this agreement that I don't know if it's a safe third country agreement. Legally speaking, I don't know. This is very confusing, and it's very odd and sketchy to me that the White House has not released any kind of documentation outlining exactly what the agreement is, which is lending me to believe that it's not a safe third country agreement. And the verbiage coming out of spokespeople from the White House is squishy to the point where I'm like, what you're saying doesn't make any sense to me. Because the first person to speak on it was McEldean, who is the acting DHS secretary. And the way he phrased it was basically, if you travel through Guatemala, you can apply for asylum there if you wish, but if you don't and you come here, we're going to send you back. Which to me is very squishy. Like, if it was a genuine, honest-to-God, safe third country agreement, why wouldn't you just say you have to apply for asylum in Guatemala if you're traveling through Guatemala? Like, I don't know. There's some weird word games being played here where I'm very interested to see what exactly this agreement is, if we ever get to see it. Like, I'm so confused right now. Like, I don't know what to think of this, but I still have all the same logistical questions that I had when it was first proposed in the first place, which, first of all, how in the hell do you make the argument that Guatemala is a safe third country for anything? Second of all, how do you logistically prove that somebody traveled through Guatemala to get here? Like, you can get to the U.S.-Mexico border from Honduras or El Salvador by not going through Guatemala. Like, you can do it by sea. Like, you can use waterways and actually not go through Guatemala. So how would you even begin to prove that somebody did it on foot through Guatemala versus doing it on a boat in circumventing Guatemala? Like, it's just, logistically speaking, it makes no fucking sense to me. And obviously the bigger problem that Guatemala is not even remotely set up to have any kind of influx of asylum seekers. Like, people were talking about it online yesterday when it dropped, and basically Guatemala's asylum system is non-existent. Like, they have, I believe it was like 12 employees in their asylum office, and they've processed 0 asylum applications this year. Like, it's so insane. Like, I don't, but like I said, until I see some kind of text that I can actually read for myself, like, I'm not entirely sure what the hell is going on. But U.S. media is touting it as a safe third country agreement. Guatemala media is not. The White House is saying it's a safe third country agreement. I'm really side-eyeing the fuck out of the fact that the White House has not released the text of the agreement. Like, that tells me that this ain't what they say it is. But anyway, that can be to be determined. But before we wrap this up, a preview of coming events for next week. We will be having our Democratic primary debates, Part 2, July 30th and 31st, which will be Tuesday and Wednesday. July 30th will be Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, John Delaney, John Hickenlooper, Ryan Bullock, Marianne Williamson, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, and Pete Buttigieg. Night number 2, 31st. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Kristen Gillibrand, Tulsi Gabbard, Michael Bennet, Bill de Blasio, Jay Inslee, Cory Booker, Andrew Yang, and Julian Castro. Now, how these were supposed to have been picked was a televised lottery sort of event, which I didn't watch because I got better things to do. But yeah, looking at these lineups, this was not done organically. You're not having Warren and Sanders on the same stage at the same time organically. You're not having Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on the stage again organically at the same time. Like, come on now, you stop it. But those are the lineups, and like I said, it will be Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, and I will go ahead and say it because they have already announced it. For night 2, July 31st, I will be doing, for Lions of Liberty, the Libertarians in Living Rooms Drinking Liquor, directly after that debate. So, that ought to be an interesting experience. Buckle up, because you already know how that's going to go down. And of course, I will do my own summary of both of those nights on Thursday of next week. So, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So, as always, if you did make it this far, thank you. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. Take care, and until next time.